Before we start this video, I'd like to say thank you to Black Rampage 2, who donated $19.99, and Science and Inspiration, who donated $10. This really does help me know that people appreciate my videos. Now, let's return to why there were black people in China. And let's start with Saeed of Mogadishu. This Saeed was a great traveler who went all over the world, but one of his great missions was his mission to China. His mission to China was before and also accompanying Ibn Battuta. And this is what we have to say about him, or this is what Ibn Battuta had to say about him. In this mosque also there are a number of students of religious science who receive stipends from its revenue, and it has a kitchen from which all travelers and the poor Muslims of the town are supplied with food. I met in this mosque a pious jurist from Mogadishu, called Saeed, of fine figure and character. He used to fast continually, and I was told that he had studied at Mecca for 14 years, and for the same length of time at Al Malinda had met Abu Numair and Abu Amir of Mecca, and Mansur B. Jamaz, the Amir of Al Maninda, and had traveled in India and China. So over here, what we have is a person from Mogadishu, and to be sure, Mogadishu is in Somalia. Now, you might be thinking, okay, so one guy went there. No, there was a back and forth between Somalians and these people. That's why in the previous one, at one point, he tried to utilize the Somalians to go to that place. And like I said, later people would use Somalians as the people who traveled there. So this guy, the pious person who went to China, is recorded in the book of Ibn Battuta. But there's something deeper than this, which is if we look at the word Zanj itself, experts say that the word Zanj might actually come from Chinese, the word Sengi or Sengchi. I don't know how to say it. And remember that Chinese people were so knowledgeable about these Africans that they made a deep separation between the people of the Zanj regions, aka Sengi, or the Abyssinians. And you can see there that there's this clear difference that they put there. It's because they knew about the trade, and on multiple occasions they write about the trade to Yemen. Now, Ibn Battuta usually writes about this um, trade between these two regions, but usually stops at Yemen. But that's because why deliver some of the stuff directly to Somalia when you could send it to Yemen and stuff like that on land most of the time? But the Somalians themselves and the Chinese went to each other's lands. But keep in mind, this is not a vast amount of people. This is a small amount of people who keep going back and forth for trade reasons.
As a reminder, although imported ceramics to Southern Africa and the Cape is part of our history, African ceramics are, of course, diverse in style, and we have a long, long history spanning thousands of years of beautiful, innovative ceramic objects that have been made in Africa. And I've chosen the Knock sculpture, which is so iconic. And of course, many members would know the Leidenburg heads, the 7 Leidenburg heads, of which one is illustrated here, from Leidenburg in the present-day Mpumalanga province. And I've also chosen a domestic vessel, beautifully decorated with arrows and zigzag patterns, also from the Mpumalanga area, but from 1946. So this is just to tell us, to remind us that we have this very, very rich history in Africa. Asian trade ceramics, of course, arrived before colonial times, and I've selected a few shards from the Izika collection. They were collected in the Zimbabwe area. They were not scientifically excavated, but we have them in our collection. They arrived in the collection in the late 19th century. There is the Chinese celadon fragment, Persian ceramic fragments, and underglaze blue porcelain fragments from the Yuan to the Ming dynasties. So, of course, Africa was very much connected to the Indian Ocean world, and archaeological excavations at ancient trading sites such as Mapungubwe and Great Zimbabwe has proven that we've had those connections going back many years.
When we talk about ancient trade routes like the Silk Road, we forget that the Silk Road was extended so far and wide as to touch the southern tips of Africa. And like those great civilizations that are in Africa, pre-colonial civilizations, we find things in China that were made in Africa, such as golden ornaments and coins with Africans on them. Also, in China, there are depictions of dark-skinned people, and a lot of these people are thought to have moved or have been moved in through the Middle Eastern trade routes that linked Africa to East Asia. Now, some people believe that Africans founded the dynasties of China. This is not what this is about. I'm not going to claim something like that. To me, that's kind of outrageous, especially given the fact that some of the civilizations in Africa do not predate these Chinese civilizations. But it's obvious that the Chinese were very familiar with the direction of the Africans because there are maps drawn up by Chinese people which depict the African continent. And not only that, they depict African people, as you see in these figurines, pretty accurately. And they know which direction they come from. They even have names for these people. And these are different than the native black people which are around Asia. These people are specifically known because of their direction and where they fit on the map and where they came from. This map depicts 3 areas. One is Japan, parts of Japan. The other is Asia, wholly Asia. The other is Africa, and it shows parts of Eurasia. Interestingly, Europe is completely left out. Now, Kunyun or Kunlun was the name that they gave to African slaves or Africans, but then they started associating it with African slaves. And there's even a book that is about a slave that becomes an immortal that was written in ancient China and was revised in the 1500s and became how he became an immortal.
当我们想到古代中国时，许多人认为它是一个文化上与世隔绝的地方。在我们印象中，古代中国人以他们的技术、艺术、文学为傲，不关心外部世界。当然，丝绸之路促进了一定程度的文化交流，虽然这个时期的对话者多来自中亚、日本、韩国和东南亚。但是中国与黑人的接触呢？古代中国人对黑人的了解是可信的吗？根据历史资料，好像他们确实是了解的。今天我们将讨论古代中国人眼中的黑人，以及非洲人在中国领土上的第一个有纪律的证据。
中国文献中最早涉及黑人的是公元前5世纪莫迪的著作。莫迪在他的哲学论集《墨子》中区分了一些人和其他人，一些人指的就是黑人。稍后的著作《山海经》里，黑人被描述为有着虎头鸟足的生物，然而这说的都不是非洲人。 黑不过是指华夏帝国周边的蛮夷之族。直到很晚，我们才开始看到一些参考文献中的黑人，指的是非洲人。昆仑人作为一个新的人种分类，逐渐地被用于描述有着黑色皮肤的外国人。这个词开始被广泛使用，是在公元7世纪，广州都督陆元瑞被一个据说是马来西亚后裔的外国商人所杀之后。唐宋年间，昆仑的疆域被认为不仅包括东南亚，甚至远至非洲东海岸。昆仑代表了一大批不同种族的外国人。从12世纪的作家朱玉的作品中，我们可以看到昆仑人之间的区别。在他的《平洲可谈》一书里，记载了一种昆仑人比任何其他的人种都要强壮。在他的笔下，这种昆仑人有红色的嘴唇、白色的牙齿和墨黑的皮肤，而且他们是被阿拉伯商人带来的，一般被卖给广州地区富贵家庭做佣人。学者们认为这些昆仑人就是非洲人，但是我们怎么知道这是真的？1930年，中国学者张新良写了一本书，追溯到唐朝，证明了昆仑一词曾被用作一个广义的术语，但是对于特定的人群，更专业的术语是层期。这两个词是阿拉伯语中 zinj 在中文里的音译，本意为黑。这是昆仑人被阿拉伯商人作为货物带到中国最清楚的证据。
As easy as it should be to spot the difference between an African and a Chinese person, there's still a hangover of who or when Black Africans landed in China. The earliest we do know is that it must have been East Africans who actually have wrote about those areas, including places like ancient Egypt, which were aware of places very, very far away. Somewhere in 200 BC and going forward, the emperors and adventurers of China thought of going to a place which they called Dachin, which means second China. This place is thought to have been Greece or Rome. When they traveled that direction, they found it impossible to get there, especially since there were so many merchants who had ulterior motives from the Middle East. The Middle East has always been familiar with Egypt, China, India, and Rome. Everybody else was in the outskirts, and so they were only partially aware of each other. One day, the Chinese finally made it to Dachin, and they depict all kinds of narratives about the Romans and the Greeks. They too observed ancient Egyptians, or Egyptians at that time, and noticed that there were people of extremely dark color. Later on, as the story goes on, we have people like Alexander and the Islamic merchants who became way more familiar or familiarized the Chinese way more with darker skinned people. Now, these darker skinned people were different than other darker skinned people which they're familiar with, which were the Indians. Even the Indians were shocked by the appearance of the Africans, though there are other people around India that have that appearance. But to know that it was so abundant in other places was a shock. In the court of Kublai Khan, after Genghis Khan and his dynasty that lasted a very short time, but expanded far and wide, Kublai Khan found himself somewhere close to Europe. And in his court, We have depictions of Europeans, mainly from Rome, and we also have depictions of Africans, black Africans. Luckily, these places did not fall under the reign of Kublai Khan. In fact, Kublai Khan dynasty, his entire lineage crawled all the way back to China. Finding out that the world was so big was one of the biggest things ever. In the 1200s, the Khans did damage, but in the 1300s, the information that the Khans had kept was a curiosity to the Chinese. And so they wondered, how big is the world really? And so Zheng He traveled all the way to East Africa to find out.
郑和前3次的航行到了越南、爪哇和斯里兰卡以及印度，只有1413年的第4次航行中，他才间接地抵达了非洲。那是在伊朗的霍尔木兹海峡，郑和见到了来自索马里首都摩加迪沙的商人。然而对于郑和和他的同行者，这次见面最神奇的地方在于，他们有机会看到长颈鹿，一种他们从没见过的生物。1414年，郑和的船队带着长颈鹿和几个非洲的自由人返回中国，以向皇帝朝贡。1417年，郑和船队的第5次远航在非洲登陆。位于非洲东海岸的这些航行，最权威的记录来自于随军翻译官费信。他虽然不是郑和船队里热情的追随者，但他提供了关于这群人航行最准确、最有启发性的记录。同样重要的是，这些记录帮助我们了解中国人怎么看待15世纪东非人的生活。
This is Seeu Village, located in the northeast of Kenya. Legends among local people speaks of a story that more than 600 years ago, survivors from a sunken Chinese ship found their way here and married to the local beauties. People who live in the house you're seeing behind me was proved to have Chinese genetics.
According to legends, a team of Chinese sailors survived a shipwreck in the Indian Ocean waters and settled in Lamu Island. Historians contend that the sailors were part of a fleet sent by the legendary Chinese navigator Zheng He. 6 centuries later, the descendants of these Chinese sailors are visible in Lamu, where China's ancient maritime Silk Road terminates. In Seeu Village, archaeologists have discovered artifacts like porcelain and coins that were symbols of the Ming dynasty.
This is some pieces of Chinese porcelain here. When I walk around, you will meet these things. There are many steel pieces. When you walk around, you'll see the small pieces. So I found it here in Seeu.
Mwamaka and her family are among the ones who are a living testimony of the earliest contacts between Kenya and China. It was in 2002 that a team of distinguished Kenyan and Chinese researchers carried a DNA analysis on Mwamaka's 63-year-old mother and discovered that she has Chinese genetics.
They came and we welcomed them first day, and they took some hair of us for texting to ensure that we are one of them.
Soon afterwards, the Chinese government offered Mwamaka a scholarship to study Chinese traditional medicine in China. Kenyan and Chinese archaeologists have been tracing evidence of ancient contacts in the Kenyan coast. They hope to find the shipwreck to help unearth all artifacts symbolizing ancient cultural and trade ties.
Now, I want to address one more comment, which I think is a very important one, where a person said, didn't you just make a video belittling the similarities between the Nigerian language and Japanese language? Firstly, just to address that part, I was not belittling it. I was just telling you that they were not similar at all. Not because of guesswork, not because I remember seeing the similarities myself and thinking they must be connected. And then I tried to compare the languages together, and they were not connected in any way, shape, or form. Words that sounded the same had completely different origins, and some of these words are novel. I'll give you an example. There's a word called mina in Japanese, which means myself. There's also another one, mina, which means everybody, but myself. That mina that means myself, and mina in Zulu. The mina in Japanese is from the word me in English. So clearly there's no similarities there. And then, there's so many others. There's so many others that I could bring up where they either the similarities are because of some common language that exists today, like English, or the word was not what it was 200 years ago, 100 years ago, and it looks similar today, but it's different. Another thing to show languages are similar or not is to look at the numbers. Now, he says there, I didn't finish watching that video, so I'm not 100% sure what your conclusion was, but I watched enough to know you were dismissing the relations. Well, I wasn't dismissing them, I was addressing them. And the reason why I was addressing them was because I know that I'm supposed to be biased and say that all people who say that black people are thingy, and I should go, yes, absolutely, but I can't do it. I'm sorry. I have to be honest. So I was not dismissing it, I was just addressing it. So it's interesting to me that you would use the same language similarity relations argument as the foundation for this video. Well, so let's think about it. Can you compare languages from Africa to each other and feel that they are similar to each other, and then not compare language that is, I don't know, a world away? This is like saying, someone saying, I believe that Earth and Mars had a similar origin. And then someone says, oh, that's cool. I believe that Earth and Zeta Reticuli had a common origin that is light years away from us. And then one of them says, nah, but they don't have a common sun. They don't have a common planetal system. And then you say, oh, so you're going to say that these planets that are close to each other might have similarities, but then this planet that's very far away doesn't. What's wrong with you? It's like, no. And also, this, by the way, this speculation, which I admitted in that previous video, is still speculative, is something that's supported by a lot, well, some linguists. There's not that many linguists who study this part, by some linguists who say that they can see not only a historical but a linguistic history between these places being connected by the land area that is Chad. Now, they say themselves as well that they can't tell if it's borrowed or if it's a common origin, but further investigation has to be done. But I could tell you that in Japan, it's not that at all. There's a lot of languages that claim to be related to Japanese. I'll give you one example because they have some words similar as well, but it's easy where they go, nope, it's just a coincidence, because it is. Japanese is one of those languages that have a lot of coincidences with other places. Also, did it seem like I was just like poo-pooing it to anybody? Did it seem like I was just throwing it away when the guy literally said Ieyasu and he said Iyasu instead of Ieyasu? Doesn't that seem slippery to anyone, that someone wouldn't say the real name but change it so that it sounds similar? Also, the fact that the word Greek word for Jesus sounds a bit like Iesus as well. I just wanted to show you. If he just did the linguistic thing, it would have been a completely different video. But there was stuff he was adding on to that was obvious to me. Like, you can't call these similarities. Not because he's a bad guy, not because any of that, just because we need real history. And if my job here is just to go thingy, then let's just go crazy. Let's just, you know that black people invented the sun. Do you know that black people invented the universe? Like, how stupid are we going to get with it? And I'm not calling that guy stupid. I'm just saying, let's not just say anything.